This is exercise 14. We begin by going to File, Open, find exercise 14, the folder, and find sample exercise 14. Hit Open. The next thing we want to do is we want to go ahead, and you'll see this is actually a state of suppression to a degree in that it compresses the file. What we need to do is go to the very bottom and you'll find an extrude one. Just right click on it and find delete. Select also delete absorbed features, the checkbox, and hit yes. Now you should see the crossfire injection cover. This is a casting, and basically when we're doing castings, this lesson is in two parts. Exercise 14 includes how to modify this to add draft and prepare it for molding. The second half of this exercise, which will be covered in exercise 14b or 15, is where we actually mold it using the mold tools inside SolidWorks. In this case, what we want to do is we want to take a look and interrogate this model. We'll learn a lot about editing in this exercise as well. First of all, let's right click on any of the icons and find the mold tools. And mold tools have popped up on the left hand side. What I need to do here is that first thing we want to do is we want to look at draft analysis. This will tell us if there's any draft on the parts. Draft is usually put on any type of molded part to enable it to pull out of the mold easier after it's been injected. We select the draft analysis, set it to 1 degree, and then direction of pull, we could select this face right in the center there. And now we hit calculate. And whatever is in yellow requires draft. Whatever is in green is okay. It's positive draft. If we flip it over on the other side, you'll see again, whatever is red, this is negative draft, but that's fine because that's going to be the core side of the mold. But the yellow needs to be changed so they're all the same color. So on the outside here of the part, everything needs to be green. On the inside needs to be red. So we have to remove the yellow. We could go ahead and cancel out of there. And the first step is to look at the model. As we can see here, we were lucky enough to get a SolidWorks model which has a feature tree. You'll not always be that lucky. A lot of times you have to bring in neutral file formats like an iJust file or a step file and modify those. Those are a little bit more difficult, but not impossible. In this case, we're going to go ahead and use our Wayback Machine. That's this little blue bar. It's actually called the rollback bar. We could grab that with the left mouse button and drag it all the way up to the very top feature to see how it was constructed. We could see it was basically chiseled out of this block of material. Now, if we're lucky, we could just add the draft while it was extruding if it was from the base up. But if we take a look at this in the sketch, it appears that it was drawn from the side. So unfortunately, we're going to have to work on a different method with this. We're going to have to add draft manually. On the mold tools, we'll find the draft icon. Select the draft icon, and the neutral plane is going to be the plane that's going to not change when we add draft. When you add draft to an object or to faces, typically it's going to grow or shrink depending upon what faces you select. In this case, the base of the model is going to have the flanges that are attached to it, which have bolt holes attached to them, which mounts to the engine and an automobile. With that type of a mounting, we cannot have the base change at all because the mounting holes will also change. So we need to have just the top change. So that means that the underside will be our neutral plane, meaning that it will not change. We see a directional arrow here at the lower right corner. This is an indication of what direction the draft is going to go. Right now, if we look at the arrowhead, it's going to not change at the base, but it will grow upward. So we want to flip that. We want to shrink as it goes upward to make it thinner at the top so it pulls out of the mold. So we just click on the arrowhead to reverse it, or you could hit this little icon here, reverse direction. Now we'll add 1 degree of draft to this, and the faces we want to draft we could select individually with this dialog box active, or we could just select all faces from this option here. And that selects all the side faces for us. And we could hit the green check mark to apply it. Now, initially we might not be able to tell if there's any draft there other than to use the draft analysis tool because it's such a small amount. Now, if we actually increase the value here by double clicking on the draft icon and changing this to maybe 7 degrees, we could see a much clearer picture. But of course 1 degree just isn't a lot, so let's change that back. And we could use the draft analysis tool instead. So we could select the top face as the direction of pull and then hit calculate. And we can see it's green. That's good, and the bottom is red. And all the faces should be green. Now we could take the rollback bar and drag it back down. Drag it down to just below the shell when the shell occurred. Let's do another draft analysis here and hit calculate. We can see that this shaft needs draft added to it. So let's take a look at it. Right click on it and you'll find edit feature or edit sketch. In this case we want to edit the feature and see if we could add draft while it was extruding. And sure enough we can, because it was drawn off of the base. The draft has to be added to it. So we could click over here to draft on 1 degree and hit the green check mark. Once again, if we do draft analysis, we should now see that it's all green. Let's drag it down a bit further, all the way to the bottom. Here we start to see some error messages. Basically the top shrank. So there's edges, like for example these edges here, that had a difficult time trying to accommodate the fillet that was on them earlier. So we could delete these just by clicking on them and hitting the delete key. If you get a continue or ignore, just ignore it as we delete them. And now we have one little error message left. It is a good idea to get rid of the error messages as soon as they pop up because they could reduce your performance of SolidWorks by up to 10 times. Okay. Now, technically we would go back and add those fillets manually. We're going to skip that for right now, but know to always keep a copy of the original file so you could go back and interrogate the models and compare them and make sure that the geometry hasn't changed significantly. Now let's take a look at using draft analysis again. We could see that the base here needs to have draft as well as the ribs. Don't worry about the holes because we're going to fill those in. Those are going to be drilled in or machined after it's molded, so we don't have to worry about that. These, feel free to put draft in on those using the draft tool that I showed you earlier. We're not going to do that in this exercise. Let's take a look at this. The ribs. Here we have one of the ribs that was created and then it was patterned. If we change the original rib, we should be able to apply that to the patterns and therefore skip having to add draft to each individual one. So let's edit the original one and then we should be okay. So we'll grab the rollback bar and drag it up above the patterns. And now we could add draft to this. After discussion with the designer of this, we discovered that these are nothing more than cosmetic, and therefore it doesn't matter where the draft starts or ends or what's thickened and what's not. So we could go to the draft tool. We could select the top face as a neutral plane, make sure the arrowhead's pointing up, and then the faces to draft. Again, we don't have to even select them other than go to the all faces and hit the green check mark. We might actually want to start adding some fillets on this as well because everything needs to be filleted on a casting, as any sharp edges have a tendency to crack So fillets on aluminum castings especially are necessary. So let's add some fillets to this before we go any further. We'll go to the fillet tool over here and we'll add 60 thousandths radii to the faces and edges. And I'm accidentally selecting things I don't want to add to it. I really just wanted the faces. It's giving me a little bit of a hard time. Let me clear this selection and start over again. And that should take care of it. Let's just make sure the other side looks the same. Missing one right here. And that should about do it. Hit the green check mark to apply it. Now we roll back using the rollback bar. You can see that they're not on the pattern. That's because we have to edit the pattern too by right-clicking on it. And we could select Edit Feature and make sure under Faces to Pattern that the fillet is part of that. So we could select the surface of the fillet. Actually, we don't want Faces to Pattern, my mistake. We want Features to Pattern. Make sure that fillet is selected and hit the green check mark. And there it is. Let's take a look again at our draft analysis. Make sure that we're on the right track. Unfortunately, we can see that the ribs didn't carry over the fillet, or the ribs didn't carry over the draft. So we're going to have to go back and edit that. It's a good thing we double checked. So let's go back and right click on this and edit feature. And unfortunately, because we have this dialog box open, we're not seeing our feature tree. So we could click over here and just find the draft icon right between the two blue ones. Hit the green check mark to apply that. And once again, let's just verify our situation. And it looks good. The next step is to add draft to these surfaces here. Let's go ahead and we'll actually roll back all the way to the very bottom. And we'll go to the draft tool. The neutral plane will be this face right here. Make sure that the arrow is flipped up. And the faces to draft, let's try all outer faces. Looks good. 1 degree of draft, hit the green check mark to apply. Again, we probably want to add some fillets onto that, so go to the fillet tool, and you could select this edge here. Or this let me clear that. And hit the green check mark. If you didn't want to add the fillets on the holes, then select these edges individually. Okay, the next thing we need to do is add some complex fillets on here. This type of fillet we're going to add is a very complex fillet, and it's added using the 3 corners. This is going to be called a setback fillet. What we need to do is hold Control and select the 3 edges. And we go to the fillet tool. And now we go to the very bottom under setback parameters, set unassigned, and so we select the vertex, which is in the corner. We'll hit set unassigned once again. We can see a little preview occurring here, and we also have our setback parameters. We'll leave it at 60 thousandths, but each one of these is essentially the adjustment for this transition. This comes in handy in a cast part, especially in corners, because these corners have a tendency to crack once the part solidifies after it's constructed in a mold. So what we're going to do, we'll double click on this first one here, and you can see the arrow is pointing in that direction, and we'll set that to 0.25. Then double click on the next one. That's the longer edge. That's going to be 0.4. And then click on the last one. And this will be 0.25. And you can see the transition as it pulls the length out of the transition here. So this is 400 thousandths. That's 250. 250. Hit the green check mark to apply. And that is what they call a setback fillet. Could even be considered an elegant fillet in that it's used for other methods as well. Now we're going to go ahead and just add a couple additional fillets here. I'm going to select this edge here and this here. We'll see if we could get the backside in two. And apply that. And now go to the fillet tool again. Select this edge. And that one. And you might have to put these in separately, as I'm doing here. And we don't want to fillet this little notch out, because the notch out is going to be used for something on the model. And there are fillets. For practice, there's an additional one on the inside of the model that you could work on. Okay, we've pretty much added all the fillets we need to. Now what we need to do is prepare the model for its construction, for molding. We need to actually fill in these holes. What we can do, rather than draw in geometry and fill it in, we could just right click on the surface, and there's an option to suppress. Select suppress, and that will suppress all the holes. Another thing we might want to do, if you're getting an error message, just hit continue to ignore. By the way, you probably don't see it on my screen as it's popping up outside of the screen here that I'm working on. But now we need to fill this hole in. So we select the face, start a sketch. Right away, hit convert entities, and just go to features and extrude boss. And extrude that down 0.125 thick. You can leave those holes in there, that's fine. Now the error message that we're getting, let's interrogate that. Here it is. If we flip it around, we can see it's the channel that's below there, and this channel is used for a gasket. Now if we zoom up a little closer, you'll see that there might be a problem somewhere within here. And I'm not seeing it offhand, so let's edit the sketch. Right click and edit sketch. We could also ask it what's wrong. It says it's unable to offset. So right click, edit the sketch. What you'll find is that it's disjointed or disconnected from the rest of the body. What happened is sometimes with these fillets, when we change the size or parameters of something, perhaps it got broken away from the rest of the model. So here's what we can do. We could actually just group select it and hit delete. And now we could select the inside edge with the right mouse button and select loop. The loop selects either face that the edge is connected to. In this case, that's not the face we're looking for. We hit the arrow to flip it, and it grabbed this. Now we could go to offset entities, put 0.25, and let's see what happens here. Let's try and hit reverse. And the reverse, we don't get an image, meaning that it's not going to work. So let's clear that out. And we'll select individual edges and try and repair it ourselves. Or we could actually, right now, let's hit undo, bring back the original geometry, and now we could hit display delete relations, and we can see that there's a lot of bad relations here. We could delete them all, or we could add our own back into that. But right now that looks good. Let's just leave that and hit rebuild. In real, if this was for a real project, you would want to go through and interrogate the geometry even further, make sure that you could get it to work. I'll tell you right now, the problem is with the size of these fillets, it's not like in the offset on the inside from this inside radius, because the fillets have a tendency to disappear because they can't exist at that offset. So chances are you would leave this alone and then just draw it in separately. Okay, but that fixes it for our model here. Let's go ahead and save this. And we're done. That finishes exercise 14.